There's a saying that was told to me a long time ago in the arts about what artists really need for themselves, which is these three sort of aspects that sort of work in correlation to each other, which is time, space, and money. Now, I am of the experience that I can often get one, possibly two of these at any given moment, but with the difficulty I find is trying to find all three at the same time. Because, for instance, today I walked into the studio because today I have time to be in the studio, and I ran out of some of my resources. So, and I don't. Well, it's not that I don't have the money, but I don't have the ability because it's a Sunday and things are closed and it's a holiday weekend and all this. But basically, it's the idea that I ran into a situation of not having, theoretically, the money to buy more materials when I have the time to be working. But part of what I want to get at is like everybody talks about that. Literally, like it doesn't even matter if you're an artist or a creative person or not, because time, space, and money is quite literally what everybody wants. But what we want, and what I want as an artist, is not literally just like time, space, and money. And and I will differentiate it slightly with its quality time, space, quality money, because it's like when you're dating somebody. Like there's one thing to spend time with the person, your significant other, or married to them or whatever, your significant other, and then there's quality time with that person, and that the difference is subtle but massive. There's a huge difference between just cohabitating and actually spending sort of intimate time, and it's that characteristic of that intimate time, that quality time, that artists and I keep trying to make everything like third person so that it's not super personal, but I guess that's what this I guess vlog that I'm doing here is very personal. So it's my experience that I need time not just to actively be producing, but passively being thinking about producing. Um, Try not to do too much passive time. I try to be more active, but I need to have time to just reflect and go out and get inspired and see other art and meet people and whatever I need to do my work. And non-creative people don't necessarily understand this. Like my wife's non-creative, so she doesn't understand that. But even within the creative fields, sometimes we don't understand this, and sometimes I don't, because I will procrastinate to no end watching YouTube videos or Netflix or anything when I'm sitting there the whole time going, I should be reading that recent book that I just bought. Or I should even just go over to my library, my shelves, and just choose a book and read that book, because that book is going to inspire me in ways that this procrastination technique, this avoidance technique is not going to do. And that's a difficult thing to do, because we need time. The time, though, again, it's not like practice time. It's they say like put in 10,000 hours. I don't need 10,000 hours. I'm way past that. What I need is time to be able to just be, because one of the harder things, especially as life goes on, because again, I'm in the older generation, is that you are carrying more baggage. Okay, fine. I'm carrying more baggage. I am so bad at making this third person, but I'm carrying more baggage, and that baggage weighs me down. It makes it so that I can't clear my mind and just let things happen. I can't. A lot of times I can't be open to a new experience because I'm so fixated or bogged down in some previous experience, or something else is just going on in my life that is taking up my attention. All of these things make it difficult to find time. It's one of those characteristics of the creative industries that I want to always have time for creating. And I'm about to have my first kid, and I'm like, oh my gosh, am I gonna have time? And I always looked at friends of mine who had children and that were creative, and I noticed they always had a gap in their work. And I was always like, was that because of the child? Like, I don't know. And everybody has a different answer. Everybody has a different life story, but I just find it very interesting, like the nature of how we use our time, because on the one hand, I feel like I'm not very productive at all. I'm like, oh my gosh, I got to get into the studio. I got to do some more work. I got to, whatever I need to do, just more of it. And then other creative friends of mine come to me and they're like, oh my gosh, you're so productive. And I'm like, really? Because I feel like I'm not doing a darn thing. So it's all a matter of perspective. I have a very strong, like production ethic. Like, I feel like I should be always producing. Not every creative person does. Some people sit around and think for a year and then go into the studio and make the thing that they've been trying to sort of work out in their head for the past year. I do that sometimes. I mean, there are times, like I remember a time when I was working in Ohio, I didn't make work for more than a year. I just was uninspired. I didn't have whatever. I didn't have the resources. I was living in the middle of nowhere. I mean, I like taking pictures of people. Generally, we could say beautiful people. There just weren't a lot of that around. I mean, and there are laws about, like, of course, working with students and things like that. So, like, I was very limited. I lived in a town of only 500 people, like literally 500 people. That includes young and old and everything. So I had limited resources to make work, and I was a bit stymied. And this is part of, I will do like a little trilogy here of like time, space, and money. This is the first one being time. And at that time, I had a lot of time available to me because I was living in the middle of nowhere. And I had very limited distractions. I had very limited opportunities in many ways. But what I had was a lot of opportunities because I had the freedom to do pretty much whatever I wanted. I had the space to do as big work as I had ever wanted to do in my life up to that point. So it's that nature of trying to find that balance of like time, space, and money. Like right now, as you all can see in my studio, like I've got a decent amount of space. It's not great. I could always have better. And I have time, but I'm probably most limited currently on my money. Like when I was in the UAE working in Abu Dhabi, I had a ton of space, a ton of money, but limited time. So it always seems to be this balance of having one, maybe two, and then not the third. It's really, I don't think I've ever had a time in my entire life where I had all three simultaneously available to me, and that makes it an aspirational goal to have that someday. Because, like, boy, it would be really great to be able to actually like win the trifecta of those three things simultaneously. They are very important to me. Like I asked my mother one day, I was like, so what makes, what's a good day? What makes you happy? And she said, the freedom to be able to do whatever I want to do without any pressure or judgment or anything. And I was like, wow, that is good. Like, yeah, that ability to just do what you want to do without any constraints of space, time, or money makes for an amazing day. And that even, constitutes like, oh, I want to take off for the weekend and go to, whatever place, whatever thing sort of finds you that joy and that happiness. That's the thing. And that's tough. But when it comes to time, like, I find myself wasting a lot of it. I think I could be more productive. I think I could be better at many aspects of time management that I am very bad with. But I think a lot of creative people struggle with this time management thing, because at a certain point in my life, I remember I sort of devoted too much time. I definitely was like obsessed with like, I've got to be working. I've got to be making better. I've got to learn more, do more, try more, create more. And I got obsessed about it. I mean, I think at some point, the desire to be a creative person, you sort of need an obsession about it, or else kind of like, why are you doing it? But I'm not obsessed with it at this point. I think it's just now just in part of my personality that I am thinking about these things and working on these things. And so like it's ingrained into me at this point. So I don't think it's an obsession as much as it's just who I am. And that I am great with that. That's not a negative. So that need for time, again, it's about quality time, because I have lots of time, but exterior pressures of life can often get in the way. In my case, like just worries about money and jobs and opportunities and writing and like having to shift gears. I think what they call these days sort of code shifting, but it is kind of code shifting, because I know code shifting is meant as sort of like a racial thing, like a sort of, not a racial thing, but like a change in who you are, and you're doing something differently. And I do mean it that way, because I mean it as I have to shift from being a creative person to writing an application for a grant. And that's a very bureaucratic code that I have to shift into that. And sort of, so the writing of grants, applications, all this kind of stuff, exhibition opportunities, these are a completely different side of my brain, that when I'm doing that, I kind of, and even teaching, like it's really sometimes difficult to balance teaching in the same day with being in the studio, because teaching is oftentimes, because I'm often doing introduction or intermediate courses, like it's sort of dumbing down, and so I'm breaking things down to the simplest of things to try and teach them and how they work. But then when I go into the studio, I'm trying to elevate things and make things more than the simplest of natures. And so it's this shifting of sort of personalities, we could say, like more or less like I have to put on a work facade when I'm doing work, and then I have to cut that loose and then go into the studio, and being able to find the ability to shift from the work me to the realistically, I'll even say like, so the husband me, the son of aging parents me, the soon-to-be parent me, the teacher me, the what other sort of criteria, the YouTuber me, the artist me, all these different sort of channels, these different perspectives of me, these different ways that I engage with the world. And it's hard to separate them sometimes. And so this goes back to the quality time. So like being able to decompress, like this is a term I use because I've always used it because it's my thing. I've always felt a lot of pressure in my life. Not to point fingers directly at my parents, but it's kind of my parents' fault. My brother was a bit of, he was bipolar. And so he was a bit of a handful for sure in his teenage years when his bipolar sort of came out. And I was then given the responsibility at a very young age, because I was probably 9, 10 years old at this time, to compensate for my parents. Basically, like they felt, keep in mind, this is early 80s, so 1980s. We're talking like quite a long time ago at this point, and times have changed and sensibilities have changed. But at the time, when my brother was coming out, well, not coming out, but when my brother was showing the symptoms of bipolar, they thought they failed. They thought it was their fault. They didn't know how to deal with it, and so in compensation for that, I was encouraged, let's say that's polite. I was encouraged to be a much more, I'm not going to say obedient, but like, my dad was the local priest, so he needed to have a child that he successfully was able to raise, basically. Like, so if he's going to lead the flock of parishioners through the church, and was unable to do his own family, that would have sort of shown badly on him. So in order for him to more or less like save face on the difficulty that my brother faced for our family, I needed to step up and fill that gap and be that child that they could hold up as, see, we're good parents. And that's a lot of pressure on a kid. I mean, obviously I didn't know this, and I don't believe they did this intentionally. And it wasn't, they didn't like literally say like, hey, we failed Chris. Could you please sort of, try and help us out and do something nice? Like, that's not how it worked. It was just sort of how I see it. So and keep in mind, this is all perspective, but this goes back to my baggage, because like, I'm a very anxious person. I overthink everything way too much. And because of that, how do I say? I can't shut my brain off, basically. So the ability to, like, quote unquote relax, like people are like, oh, just take some time, relax. If I sit in front of a whatever, TV, YouTube, whatever, Instagram, I am constantly thinking. It's very difficult for me to read a book, because while I'm looking at the words, I'm thinking about not only what the words are saying, but then my mind sort of progresses on to many other things that the book is leading me into thinking about, let's say. So like, if it talks about, vacations, suddenly I'm going down this whole rabbit hole of like, boy, where would I want to go on a vacation? Yeah, I haven't been on a vacation in a while. Last vacation I went on was this. Oh, that was really great. So like, my mind is always racing, and it's very difficult for me to shut my brain down. I know this is not unique. I know it's very common. A lot of us have it. Especially us in the creative industries, that we have difficulty sort of shutting our brains down. And because of that, oftentimes time is not available to me. So like, while I could sit here and say, oh, I've got time from, noon to 2 to go into the studio and work, But if my mind won't allow me to disconnect, for let's say, from the stresses of the day, if I had a bad morning in a way that, like, there's more stresses and anxieties placed upon me, it makes it very difficult to just simply separate from those and go, okay, well, it's noon, so I'm gonna now go into the studio and be creative. And I think a lot of us are similar like this. Like, it's really hard to schedule creativity. And that's, this again goes back to, like, the differences between creative people and non-creative people. Non-creative people, they can schedule their jobs. Like, I go to work at 9 a.m. and I do my work until 5 p.m. That's my job. But creative people, it's really often very hard. I mean, I have a friend, Sean, who is phenomenal with his work ethic. This guy goes into the studio every morning at 9 a.m. and stays until 5 p.m. And either he's working on writing proposals or making work or researching work. I mean, he works a 40-hour week. And when he leaves his studio, he does not think about things, studio related, which is crazy to me. But everybody's different and everybody has their own path through this process. And his is that, and mine is very different from his. So, point being is that it's very difficult to get that quality time. So, I need to decompress and be open to whatever's about to happen in the studio before I enter the studio, versus a lot of people who I know who go into the studio to decompress, that they feel that act of being in the studio is their decompression. I mean, I can do it that way, but I don't think that that's my most productive way, because I feel like that frustration that I walk in with, that I need to decompress from, will impact my work. I want to walk into the studio fresh. I want to be able to just walk in and be like, okay, I'm in it, let's do it, and not have to sort of, get in gear, let's say. Like, I like to already be in gear if I can, and that's the difference between time, literal time, and quality time. I want to be in the mood, in the zone, in the whatever word that works for you to explain it, but I want to be ready to work when I go in a studio, not going to the studio to find motivation or find interest or whatever works for you. And that's really hard, because I'm always torn with other things. I've always got other things drawing my interest, drawing my stress, drawing my diversions, whatever. Sometimes they're useful, sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're family obligations, sometimes they're personal anxieties, fears, whatever they are. Do I wish that, like, I could have gone to therapy more and possibly gotten this better resolved? Sure. I mean, I've used therapy. I love therapy. I'm a big fan of it. Not a huge fan of necessarily, like, drugs to, psychiatry. Psychiatry. I'm not sure. The ones who prescribe drugs. Not a fan of that. I'm not a fan of the crutch that that sort of entails. And I say that from a personal experience. I've been a drug addict for, self-medication for these kinds of things through, pot and all the other drugs that, that we've used over the years, for sure. Another part of the time concern is actually the fear of wasting time. Time is a very precious thing in life and all that, but it's also in your studio, partly because of, like, literally time, but also because of the resources. Because if I've wasted time in the studio, I probably also wasted material and resources that I could have used on something else. But I don't I try not to find anything to be a pure 100% waste of time, because I try to always gain some information, some insight about a medium, a technique, or even just like learning, like, oh, that's what it looks like when I overwork. Like, I've gone too far with this piece. So, if at the least I learn what too much work is, too overworked of a piece. So that fear of always overworking or wasting of time in the studio is as daunting as wasting it outside of the studio. So because I don't like to go into the studio when I'm not going to say like in the mood, but like when I'm not feeling creative, let's say, because I don't want to potentially waste a piece. Because if I go in when I'm not sort of feeling the mood to be creative, and I ruin a piece, then I've wasted not only the time of doing the ruining, but I wasted all the work and effort I put into leading up to the ruining of it. So I try to stay away from those kinds of characteristics of being in the studio as well, because forcing myself to be in the studio is wrong. And that's a difficult balancing act of what I've just said there. Is being an artist does not always mean being in the studio. I can force myself to do job applications or grant applications or all these kinds of things, even when I'm not in the mood for them, though I may not do the best job at it. I do a very good job applications, grant applications, when I'm in the mood for it, because I sort of can enjoy it. Like I'm really good at things when I can find a way to enjoy it. That doesn't mean I enjoy it, but I can find an element of the thing that I like, and I can go, okay, well, this is the fun part of it. And just try and find that fun element, that aspect that is enjoyable. It doesn't mean that the entire thing is enjoyable by any stretch of the imagination, but just finding some part of it to make it so that you're like, yes, I enjoy writing these pompous things to apply for this kind of thing. Like, it's really fun to play with vocabulary and vernacular. Whatever I need to do to find my direction in the work, that's what's important. And not just about the art, but about how to write about the art. It's all part of the role of being creative. Another perspective on time is that I'm also watching my parents age very quickly. And it's very difficult for me because, more or less they've been my constant in my life. They've been my steady. They've been my, whatever, my rock. That maybe is a bit much, but you get the idea. Like, my parents have always been there for me, and they've been that thing that's that constant. And to see them age, of course, concerns me about aging and what I'm going to become as I age as well. I don't know what that's going to be, in the same way that I'm sure that they didn't know how it was going to affect them. And so this idea of like artists needing time, space, and money, the time is not just literal needing of time to do work, but it's also time, being able to be our age, let's call it, like to be able to just do the things that we do at this time in our lives, not just time in the studio, but being able to reflect and impart the things we need to for the time we are in our life. I keep saying we again. I'm trying to deflect and from being personal. But I need to be more personal, because that's When I make good work is when I'm more personal in my work. So being able to embrace the emotional impacts, like the old joke of like emotionally detached husbands. Like, I'm trying my best not to be that emotionally detached husband and trying to be better than that. And in that effort, I'm trying not to waste my time with these silly games, because I feel like sometimes the nature of like being emotionally detached about things, about life, is literally just like a game of like cat and mouse, like where I play coy and act like, oh no, I'm not that, but I really am that. I'm concerned about my parents, but I can't literally tell them that I'm concerned about them. I'm afraid of not the nature of being a dad, but I'm afraid I'm going to make mistakes, which of course is every parent's fears in being a dad, that I'm going to miss an opportunity at some point in my daughter's life. And I don't want to miss those opportunities. I want to be present. I want to be able to appreciate and enjoy and engage in those things at the same time while I am also aging. So, as much as I'm pointing fingers saying this is about my parents aging or my child growing up, this is also about me getting older. We all fear the progress of time in our own ways. Mine would be that I just don't feel like I won't get to the things I want to get to. I won't impact the next generation through my teaching. I won't find that version of success within my lifetime, whatever it is that we each are trying to achieve. It often feels like we don't have enough time to get to that point in our life. And that's a daunting characteristic of time, is having enough time to be present and appreciate what you have, but also being able to produce the things that that I feel I need to be producing to try to be the best, be best parent, husband, child, artist, teacher that I can be. That's always my goal, and I believe that's always everybody's goal. Part of the idea of trying to find time in my art is also trying to find time to be the best version of myself. If I'm off in my art, like if I'm not making the strongest work, I'm often very distracted and uncharacteristic. Like I don't know how to explain it. It's like when you're just having a bad day. When you're having a bad day, there's sort of nothing that can make you. It makes you not as good of a person as you can be. I want to be the best version of myself on any given day, and I want to make the best version of my art on any given day. But if my art's off, like most of the time, the rest of my day is off. The rest of my sort of experiences and interactions, they're just not quite as good, successful, whatever word you want to put to it, as they could be. So I feel like sometimes my life can interfere with me making good art. And equally, if I have a bad day in the studio, then that can interfere with my life the other way. And this is one of those things that, it equates to other people, other jobs, non-creative jobs as well. Like if you have a bad day at work, then that's going to translate to your home life probably in some way. And equally so, if you have a bad day at home, oftentimes you will bring that to work. But I feel like in the creative aspects of this industry, I have a little bit more control over that than, let's say, somebody who works a corporate job where like their boss just sort of like is an ass that day and they just have to deal. I generally don't have that kind of a boss or a situation, though there are things that get in the way of those experiences as well. I mean, yeah, of course I have a boss. You could say it's my boss at teaching, but kind of hands off in that boss, which is lovely. That's what I really love about academia, is that most deans and bosses are rather hands off. But there are some that are not. I have had some very hands-on deans that have been a pain in the ass because they get too involved in what goes on in the classroom. But that's not really what I'm here to talk about. The point is that always trying to be the best of yourself. So I'm always trying to be the best artist when I'm in the studio. I'm trying to be the best husband when I'm at home. I'm trying to be the best of whatever it is that I'm trying to do. And finding the time to be able to be present in each of those experiences, again, sort of having to switch between them. It's a struggle that we all have, creative or non-creative, because, you know, people go to work and they have to be a certain thing. When they come home, they have to be a different sort of thing. And some people are simply better at those shifts than others. But what I feel like is my job as a teacher and as an artist is oftentimes they overlap a bit more, because there's a lot more vulnerability and emotion included in this. Because when I'm teaching a student and they're sharing their experiences of life and they are emotional about what they are sharing, that I have to meet them halfway. So sometimes I have to be emotional in a classroom when I didn't necessarily want to be emotional. And I have to participate in that. And then those emotions then translate over into every other part of my day. So that vulnerability is one of those things. And I think it's a topic I don't like talking about, because I don't like looking, acting, or being vulnerable. Generally, people see me as a very arrogant person because I have I'm not going to say a fear of vulnerability, because I am very vulnerable at times and in certain situations, and I'm trying to be more, because people like it when other people are vulnerable. That's it, period. People enjoy that. Everybody likes having real, in-depth, emotional conversations and experiences with people. Doing the shallow, experiential, like, hey, how's the weather? Like, nobody really likes those. We tolerate them in order to get through them, to get to those real vulnerable situations. And it's one of those things where I absolutely adore when people have the willingness to be vulnerable with me. However, I am not as good at being open and vulnerable with them. And while you might say, like, what does this have to do with time? It has a lot to do with time, because being able to take the time to be vulnerable is difficult, because vulnerability is not something that I feel like I can turn on and turn off. Like, when I started this recording, I had no intention of talking about this. But as this conversation progressed, I felt more willing to be vulnerable, let's say, to share my personal experiences of vulnerability and needing to be vulnerable. I mean, because we're all looking for the same things, but part of it is that time to be willing to be vulnerable. I am constantly in fear of being judged about everything. My parents raised me in a judgy way, and again, I am not criticizing them for their parenting skills. I want to be clear about that. That's just who they are, and that was the time period and that region, and it's just, and my dad's profession, and for that matter, my mother's profession. So like it was just a very judgy lifestyle that I grew up on. I mean, I remember as a kid, I showed up to Christmas. I was in my room and I put on a shirt for Christmas, and I walked out and I was so proud of this shirt. I was like, oh, this is great. This is I look good in it. It's a great color on me. Whatever other criteria that I thought it was such a great choice. And I walk out. And my mother goes, "Oh, you're wearing that to Christmas dinner?" And I'm like, okay, I guess I'm not wearing that to Christmas dinner. And unfortunately, while I thought it was just about that, let's say that shirt, it wasn't. This happened every Christmas. No matter what I chose, my mother would always come back to me with, "Oh, you're wearing that to Christmas dinner?" So. And even all the way up into adulthood, I remember I was dating this girl, and I tried on like 6 different shirts before taking her over to Christmas dinner at my parents' house. And she's like, "Why are you trying on so many shirts?" And I told her that whole story. And I said, "Just watch. My mother's going to go, 'Oh, you wore that to Christmas dinner.'" And lo and behold, we show up, and my mother's first words out of her mouth were like, "Oh, you wore that shirt to Christmas dinner." And I look at my girlfriend, she's just like, "Oh my God." I'm like, yeah, I know. So I grew up being judged a lot. And so that fear of being judged, made me not want to be vulnerable as often because I would be judged for vulnerability. So if I was too, I remember I was sitting around the breakfast room table with my parents, and I told them this story about like what me and my girlfriend were doing and talking about all the this and that. And my mother just turns to me and just goes, "Why do you talk about everything? Just do the thing." And don't get me wrong, this wasn't like some great thing. It was just like, we were talking about like the future and what we'd like to do and trips we'd like to, and she's like, "Why are you talking about all these things? Why don't you just do them?" And I was just like, oh God. I mean, in some ways it's a great way. Just do these things. Stop sitting around, just like in the creative worlds, just like stop sitting around thinking about making art and make art. Stop talking about it. Stop, writing about it. Stop making YouTube videos about it, and just make it. Just do it. Like when I was a kid, I remember going into my mother's, when she was laying down for resting, I guess, I don't know what she was doing, but she was resting on the bed, and I'd walk in there and I go, "I'm bored," and she'd just go, "Then go do something." And I'd walk out and I'd just go do something, and that's it. That's how I sort of got over my boredom. So I've always sort of been just like that guy who just goes and does something. I like talking about things. Obviously, I'm doing a YouTube thing where I do nothing but talking. But I like talking about things because I like talking them out. And I feel like this is a great use of my time. Whether any of you will listen to this channel is a side benefit, a secondary benefit, because a lot of what this is useful for me for is using my time while I'm in the studio, where I usually silently dwell and think about things and go like, "Oh, should I do this? What should I do that?" And basically everything that I'm talking about with you all, I'm thinking about when I'm in the studio. Was I too vulnerable with this person? Was I not vulnerable enough with that person? Was that a good use of my time? And so what I'm doing here is I'm trying to use my time recording these videos as a form of decompression in many ways. Just taking my mind off of the racing that goes on in my mind and let it out a little bit. Being vulnerable, all the things that I've just been talking about. And that's part of what I've been thinking about time, is that if I'm in the studio and I'm just working and my mind is racing, it's creating more tension and compression in my brain. And one of the things that I need to do more often, which I'm sure I'm not alone in, is find ways to decompress and to take some of that pressure off of myself. And that's what I'm doing here. And I think we all need that.